Hello everyone and welcome to the MoeGamer podcast on another blazingly hot English summer day and presumably a blazingly hot American summer's day as well.
The heat broke here. It's a beautiful 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I went for a walk in the woods. No air conditioning.
Oh, that sounds...
Brag.
That sounds absolutely blissful. But, I'm just sitting in here in the dark with various fans pointing at me. Which is nice. Anyway, as you can hear, I am Pete Davison. Hopefully you know my voice by now, and maybe you know Chris's voice by now as well. He is joining us again after Joe was kind enough to guest star on it last week while Chris was unavailable. So, how are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you, Pete?
Yeah, I'm not too bad apart from melting, but...
I was all last week, and then after 2 days of devastating thunderstorms, it finally
Oh, I want
abated.
that so bad. It's like, yeah, me and my wife are just sitting here praying for rain. We just want rain more than anything. Just rain. But anyway, yeah. I am currently slaking my thirst with a nice cold bottle of Brothers Toffee Apple English cider, born in a field in Somerset, apparently. So that's cool. That's cooling me off slightly. So
I'm a cider guy.
I am as well. If you're wondering what toffee apple cider tastes like, it basically tastes like normal cider, only someone has poured a load of butterscotch sauce in it. So,
Sounds delightful.
It's pretty good. So, anyway, we're going to follow our usual 3-segment format here today. So, in this first segment, we'll talk a little bit about some recent happenings in the news and such like. Second segment, we'll be talking about some games we've been playing recently. And then in our final segment, we'll be looking at our specific topic for the episode, which this week is graphics generally, and what we sort of thought would be the best graphics we'd ever seen when we were kids and such like. So more on that a little bit later. So let's kick off with the news. Chris, you've been good enough to assemble some stories for us, so feel free to kick us off with something.
Usually post E3 has been as a slow time, but there's some pretty interesting stuff going on in the past couple days. I think one of the biggest things was that NIS Western Division posted some interesting new announcements, mainly that the Caligula Effect Overdose is coming west, along with the Princess Guide and the RPG Maker Mark V, all heading westward on consoles. I'm pretty excited about the Caligula Effect because I passed on the Western release of the Vita version of the game due to no physical copy. But now the Overdose, which is kind of an upgraded Unreal Engine-based revision with additional content, is coming physically to consoles. Oh, so cool. I'm definitely interested in getting that.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was a complete remake of it. I thought it was just a port. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's really beefed up.
I know that the Vita version has had somewhat mixed reception among people mainly due to technical issues, from what I understand. It's one of those games that was sort of just a little bit too ambitious for the Vita from the sound of things, or just wasn't coded very well. But I don't know a lot about this, so what's the gist?
Well, a lot of people call it a poor man's Persona. Basically, it's like angsty teens are trapped in some kind of otherworldly school. How do we get out while facing our emotions? Things like it's nothing like terribly like new and exciting in the world of RPGs. But the big thing that people are interested in it in general about is Tadashi Satomi is the lead scenario writer for the game, and right. He was the gentleman who is most known for basically creating Persona.
Okay.
So like Tadashi Satomi did the original Persona and the 2 Persona 2 games, as well as the 2 Digital Devil Saga games on the PS2, which are my favorite Shin Megami Tensei games, or the Digital Devil Saga games. So, although he wasn't involved in modern Persona that everyone loves, 3, 4, and 5, he kind of is the guy who kind of created that style of game in the first place.
Yeah.
So, it's got some chops behind it. A lot of the reviews I read of the original one, people were pretty hard on the combat system. But I hear the combat system's been revised and improved a little bit for the new version. It always looked interesting to me from the get-go because it has kind of an air juggle a mechanic to it. So like it's really interesting to me mechanically. So that's
Yeah.
my biggest interest in it is to get my hands on it because the battle system looks unique. But for those of you guys out there who like the visual novel, dialogue heavy Persona style games, like it's going to be a big draw for that.
Well, that does sound interesting because although I know that Persona 3, 4, and 5 are really popular and justifiably so. Excuse the motorbike outside. Anyway, yeah, Persona 3, 4, and 5 are very popular and justifiably so. But there are some sort of I'm trying to put this politely. There are a certain breed of Shin Megami Tensei fan out there who would prefer the older style of Persona, for example, things without the calendar system and that sort of thing. So yeah, this sounds like an interesting title that might kind of cater to that audience a little bit more than they feel they've been catered to in recent years. But we'll see, I guess. I'm certainly interested in it, and I'm very interested in the two other things that Nisa announced as well. So I don't know a lot about this Princess Guide thing, but it sounds potentially interesting. Sort of a bit of Princess Makers type stuff going on and RPG elements and such like, and I'm very curious how RPG Maker MV is going to be handled on console, because that to me is I mean I know there's been console versions of previous RPG Makers, but for certainly the last few installments of that's very much been a Windows program. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that. On the other hand, it's not super surprising to see it coming to other platforms, because all of RPG Maker MV was built in, pretty much built in HTML5 anyway, so it's very, very portable. The games it produces come out in HTML5 as well, so you can embed them in websites as well as make them as standalone applications. You can turn them into mobile apps recently. MV actually stands for mobile version rather than Mark V. So MV was designed specifically for people who wanted to port their RPG Maker games to other platforms, because previously, with previous versions of that, you could only export Windows versions, and then you would have to actually port the resulting code to different platforms in order to get it onto, say, iOS or Android and so on. Whereas MV has, certainly on the PC anyway, has got built-in support to export to Android APK files and so on.
I was going to say, I think what's most interesting about MV then is it's coming to the Switch specifically. Yeah. So we're talking touchscreen interface and on the go.
Yeah, that could potentially be very interesting indeed. If it's anything like the... they did a 3DS version a little while ago, didn't they? Is that right, 3DS?
I believe so.
Yeah, because what they did with that is they had a separate free download that was basically an RPG Maker player app.
Oh, okay.
Which meant that people could share their RPG Maker projects that they'd made on the DS, and people would be able to play them without having to go out and buy a copy of RPG Maker, which was a big flaw with the older console versions for things like PlayStation and PlayStation 2 and so on. You actually had to have a copy of RPG Maker in order to play people's creation, not to mention an entire memory card devoted just to RPG Maker.
Yeah, it's a little unintuitive.
Yeah, so hopefully they'll do something similar with the Switch, or they'll have some means of making sort of more portable export files from that. So yeah, very interested to see what that's going on. I'll probably stick with the PC version just because that's flexible and easy to use, and I know how to do it. I did do a cover game feature on that on MoeGamer a couple of years back now, if you've not seen that. So there's some helpful tutorials and things on there. I'll be intrigued to see if they keep all the things like plugins and stuff that you can do with the PC version, because that's one of the biggest things with MV, is that they completely revamped the sort of underlying scripting system that ran the whole thing, and they just made it so you can use JavaScript plugins to basically change the entire engine. And that includes everything from sort of changing the resolution on PC to putting in new battle systems and ways that information's displayed on screen and such like. So it'll be interesting to see how much of that is possible on the console version, how much of that will be allowed, just because console platform holders are typically quite sort of funny about bringing in mods and additional code that might be able to provide exploits and such like, but not saying that's necessarily going to happen or anything, but whether or not the Switch version will allow that level of flexibility remains to be seen. But even if it doesn't, RPG Maker is a really cool piece of software that you can make pretty convincing RPGs with. So yeah, that should be exciting and should hopefully get a lot more people into amateur game dev as well. So
Yeah, never a bad thing. I won't say fond memories, but I have memories of playing the PlayStation release of RPG Maker back in like, I don't know, junior high school, trying to make like a Pirates versus Ninjas RPG with my friend back in the day when that was all the rage.
See, that's one of those games I was so jealous of America for, because it's one of the ones that didn't get localized and brought over to Europe. So I was always so jealous every time I read a copy of EGM and they were talking about RPG Maker and such like. It was like, oh, I want that. But then I found RPG Maker 2000 on the internet and never looked back. So
yeah, I mean, it just makes more sense on PC, but still, from an accessibility standpoint, to have it on consoles is going to be pretty good for folks.
Yeah. All right, all good. What else we got?
Just a bunch of little things. We finally have a Western release date for the Shenmue 1 and 2 HD, August 21st.
Yep.
Not too much to go over there, but that's exciting news for people who don't feel like hooking their Xboxes and Dreamcasts up all the time,
definitely.
Which I am of that number. I know you were very excited for the Namco Museum Arcade PAC version.
Yes.
Hitting the Switch.
Yeah, I mean, this is cool because, I already own the component parts of this digitally. It's Namco Museum and Pac-Man Championship Edition 2 Plus together. But these having a physical edition is good news for those who like such things, like me. So, yeah, the Switch version of Namco Museum has got some good games in it. I mean, it's got some of the stuff you expect in there, like sort of Pac-Man and such like. But it's also got things like an enhanced version of the GameCube title, Pac-Man Versus, in there. It's got some arcade titles you don't see on these collections quite so often. Things like
Rolling Thunder.
Yes, Sky Kid and Rolling Thunder 2 in particular. Yeah, you don't see those very often, so those are good to give a go. I still need to write about Rolling Thunder 2, actually. That's a really good game.
I love Rolling Thunder.
Yeah.
And Namco loves Rolling Thunder. Like the weird like hooded dude, enemy dudes from Rolling Thunder make cameo appearances in Namco games all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really solid game, and also you go and play other stuff. It's clearly quite an influential game as well. It's obviously had a big impact on stuff like sort of the Shinobi series and stuff. You can see clear connections with Rolling Thunder in there. So.
Yeah, and the deliberate pacing.
Yeah, very much.
And like you can feel it as like an early example of like developers trying to suss out a way to do stealth mechanics in 2D.
Yes, very much.
So, like, when I play Rolling Thunder, it often makes me even think of Clay's, that ninja game. What's that ninja game that Clay released?
Oh, Mark of the Ninja?
Yeah, that's it, Mark of the Ninja, which is an incredible game. And, like, you can feel some of Rolling Thunder's DNA in there.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, if you haven't yet got Namco Museum and or Pac-Man Championship Edition 2 Plus, then you'll have the opportunity to have it on your shelf in September. I believe. Yeah, September 2018.
Let's see. It's also been a good week for Taito fans like yours truly. We got an announcement that there's a Darius series collection heading to the Switch, the Darius Cosmic Collection, which is going to be coming in both standard and limited edition formats. No confirmation of a Western release yet, but it's shoot 'em ups, so you can import it. But there's the standard edition, which will include the arcade versions of Darius 2, Sagaya, which is kind of a remixed version of Darius 2, and Darius Gaiden. And if you opt for the Big Bad Limited Edition, you also get the Super Famicom versions of Darius Twin, Darius Force, the Master System version of Sagaya, the Genesis version of Darius 2, and the PC Engine version of Darius Alpha, which is tremendous because Darius Alpha, for those of you who like to collect PC Engine games, is one of the more expensive shoot 'em ups on the PC Engine. So it's kind of a deal already if you get that limited edition and get your hands on that.
Yeah.
So
I can't remember the last time I saw a limited edition that actually had more games in it than other stuff. I mean, we've had limited editions that sort of give you a bit of extra DLC or stuff, but that's usually sort of fairly throwaway stuff like costumes and such like. But yeah, you're getting a whole bunch of new games in the limited edition. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, most of those Super Famicom and Master System versions are useless if you're getting the arcade versions. They're just more of a curiosity because they're so hampered. They're not really worth playing. But that PC Engine Darius Alpha is quite an exciting get. Also related, let me see here. Potentially Ninja Warriors again was announced for the Switch. Once again, no confirmation of a Western release, but it's being handled by the same folks at Natsume, who ported Wild Guns over to modern HD consoles.
Oh yeah, and they did an amazing job with that.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever played Ninja Warriors again, but it is probably one of the best games on the Super Nintendo, both in terms of visual presentation, gameplay, and soundtrack. It takes the beat-em-up genre, but takes away the belt scrolling, where you kind of go back and forth into the background, and confines it entirely to a 2D plane.
Okay.
So, and then it has kind of more fighting game style mechanics. So you can duck, you jump by pressing up, and in different button combinations yield different moves that are kind of necessary for covering different amounts of distance, depending on what your enemy's capabilities are to block high or block low. So there's strategic mind games involved. It kind of turns every scene you walk into like a duel scenario, or like there's three guys, you know, that guy can shoot high, that guy slashes low. Now how do I deal with them in what order to walk out of this scene? Like it's a really interesting game. It's a sequel to the original Ninja Warriors, which was popular in arcades as one of those giant games that took multiple screens up.
Oh, okay.
Like it was like three monitors across.
Yeah.
And that the original was also extremely famous for its music. Ninja Warriors again isn't quite as famous, mainly because it was confined to the Super Nintendo. But it's one of my favorite Super Nintendo games, so it'll be great to have it be accessible to everybody, and most importantly, affordable to everybody, because legitimate copies of Ninja Warriors again go for in the hundreds, cart only. So this is a tremendous announcement.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really cool. I like the sound of what you're describing. It's what I often find is every time I play a one-on-one fighting game, I often find myself thinking, wouldn't it be cool if these mechanics were in something that wasn't a one-on-one fighting game? And yeah, it's actually not something you see explored that often. The only one I've played that I can think of, I'm sure there's more, but the only game I've played that does very much have sort of fighting game style mechanics in a completely different genre is there's a quite old Japanese indie platform game called Fortune Summoners, which was localized by the same guy who did Reciteer.
I have that. I just don't think I've ever played it.
Yeah, I mean,
Steam backlog and all that.
Yeah, I mean, structurally, it's sort of a sort of open world 2D platformer where you explore and find items and that sort of thing. And but the interesting thing is there's three different characters in it, and one of them is very much physically focused. And in order to do all of her moves and stuff, you have to do sort of Street Fighter style button combinations and quarter circle forwards and that sort of thing. And it takes a lot of getting used to when you first start playing, and it's absolutely impossible on a keyboard as a result. But if you've got a decent gamepad, then yeah, it's a lot of fun once you get the hang of it.
Yeah, I do want to play that. I bought that whole Carpe Fulgar set, like all three of those games that they did, but I've only ever got around to playing Racketeer. I've never played the other two that they localized.
Yeah, Chantilly's is very underrated. A lot of people think it's just like the combat bits of Reciteer, but not as good. But I think
that's the 3D one, right?
Yeah,
that's polygonal.
Yeah, that's quite an underrated game. I think it's got some interesting combat, and it's got a good understanding of things like making combat more than just hack and slash. There's a lot of timing and jumping and using special moves and stuff. So yeah, it's worth a look. It's not the best game in the world or anything, but it is a lot more interesting than people give it credit for, I think. So that's my advice for the day.
Yeah, and you know, keeping an eye out on Steam sales. These games are always easy to get for a song. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're just too late to recommend for the last Steam sale, but yeah, next time it rolls around, have a look.
Let's see, what else do I got on the docket here? Just a little thing for Mega Man fans out there. It's stupid, I know, but for those of you who are not huge Mega Man fans, there was a little running joke in the Mega Man fan community. When Mega Man X5 was localized to the West, one of the localizers thought it would be a really good idea to rename all the Maverick bosses from their original Japanese names to all include Guns N' Roses references in their names.
This was the first I'd heard of this, and it it made me laugh quite a bit, but it also made me think that people would absolutely murder them for doing that today.
Yeah, like I'm not one of those guys who gets angry about localizations, but I did get angry about this because it was just plain stupid. So the delightful news is that when the Mega Man X Legacy Collection comes out this month, we will have English equivalents of the proper Japanese names for all the Mavericks in X5. The Guns N' Roses references are gone. So no more Duff McWhalen. No more Izzy Spark, like actual proper Maverick names. So that's exciting. It's basically just been a good couple weeks for old school game fans. The Toe Jam and Earl indie developed follow-up, Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove, is starting its open beta on July 5th. So that's happening now already. Yeah. That has happened. July 5th has passed. So I know you were just coming into your own and starting to really enjoy Toe Jam and Earl.
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten that this new one existed altogether, because I remember it being sort of brought up a bit when the Kickstarter first launched, but it was one of those things that I'd sort of assumed hadn't really gone anywhere. So after I covered the Mega Drive version from the Sega Mega Drive Classics pack that released a few weeks back, I was quite surprised to see that this was still going and apparently was nearing completion. And yeah, it looks like an interesting sort of reinterpretation of the first game, which is quite surprising to me because the first game is sort of a cult classic, but it's not something you hear people talking about a lot. So seeing it reinterpreted in 3D with some new mechanics and so on is it's going to be quite an interesting one, I think.
Yeah, definitely worth keeping an eye out for. What else? Just lots of little announcements. Koihime Enbu is getting an updated Western version for consoles. For those of you who've never heard of Koihime Enbu, it's an indie 2D fighting game, but the big hook is that it's all girls, so it's a bit like Arcana Heart, but all the characters are female interpretations of classic Romance of the Three Kingdoms characters, and it's also known for being pretty accessible, so that might be something for you and I to check out. Cute Moe, Romance of the Three Kingdoms fighting game. So
sounds good to me. That's lots of words I like.
Yeah, the art is really cool. And if you're a Dynasty Warriors fan, it's neat to see some of those characters reimagined as cute girls walloping on each other in 2D. So that's cool. Intacreate's newest game, Dragon Marked for Death, it finally has a winter launch window. So that is worth keeping an eye out for. That's going to be for the Switch. Worth looking up some footage of. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I think they've been demoing this at Anime Expo this weekend as well. So some people have been going hands-on with it, and I've heard some nice things about it. So,
what else? Anodyne 2 is coming. We have first footage of Anodyne 2. For those of you who are not familiar with Anodyne, it was a really interesting old-school 16-bit indie Zelda-style action RPG. It was actually one of the first indie games I ever bought. Very interesting game. It's almost like if you could combine Zelda with Silent Hill. It has like a you've traveled to another world and nothing is as it seems kind of feel. Okay. Everything is very, I don't want to call it horror because it's not outright scary or gory, but everything has a very creepy, something's not quite right here feel. All the monsters are weird. So now we have a sequel coming, and what's interesting about the sequel is that they have specifically opted for a low poly 3D graphics approach, so it looks exactly like a early launch era PS1 action RPG. Like very deliberately, like the people look like they're made of like shoe boxes that have been stitched together. Like it's really, really cool. I've often said when talking about the indie sphere with people that okay, it's really neat that we've got a million pixel art games because goodness knows no one loves pixel art more than me. But I also really love the old school early 3D aesthetic, like PS1 and Saturn, where basically you had low poly characters with pixel art mapped to them. It's like to me, probably some of the most beautiful games ever made are the Mega Man Legends games.
Yeah,
because it's specifically like pixel art on 3D characters, and it's just like a beautiful, clean looking, bright, colorful thing. So like Anodyne is kind of harkening back to that early era PS1, fuzzy, blocky, and it's just interesting to see people finally hitting that nostalgia too.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of devs experimenting with low poly stuff recently, so I think this is probably, we're looking at the beginning of a new trend here, certainly. And yeah, I'm all for it, because I've obviously got some very fond memories of the PS1 era, so if they can capture it well, I mean, we've talked about how there's sort of good pixel art and bad pixel art from modern indie developers and so on. If they can really capture that, if they can really capture that feel, and I don't know, even if they go so far as doing like bendy textures on the floor and stuff like that, that would make me happy.
Yeah, well, I just think back to like, you know, I have such fond memories of like Omega Boost, Polyphony Digital's Omega Boost, and like I specifically love like those old PS1 era games with like robot and technology and tank themes, because I just love that the tank is like a big shoebox, but then they've drawn a tank on the side with like pixel art. Like that whole aesthetic makes me super happy, and like I would love to be able to like do some work in that sphere, because like when Minecraft first became popular, I used to do like in college, I used to make mad bank making custom Minecraft character skins for people.
Oh, yeah. Like,
I really have a lot of fun mapping low count pixel art onto 3D boxes. Like, it's fun for me to kind of think of it like a puzzle, like how to wrap those textures around. So, like, I really love that look and that feel.
Yeah, well, it's another twist on sort of being artistic and creative within deliberate limitations in this case, isn't it? Which is often where we get some of the most interesting artwork coming on. I'm sure
it's the most fun. Artists love to work within confines. It's what creates challenge, and it's what turns it into a game, basically.
Definitely.
How can I do the most with those limitations?
I'll tell you what else, this isn't related to the graphics, but I'll tell you what else this game reminds me of, because I haven't come across it before, either the previous one or the new one. But it kind of vaguely reminds me of Alundra. Did you ever play that?
Oh, yeah. Don't even get me on Alundra. That's a separate episode.
I'll bear that in mind then, yeah. But I mean, just quickly then, without getting too wrapped up in it, I mean, just sort of the structure of how this series has gone kind of reminds me of Alundra, because that was originally a pixel art top-down Zelda-like, although it was 32-bit rather than 16-bit in style. And then that moved on into PS1, early era 3D graphics and so on. So yeah, there's some interesting parallels there. It'd be interesting to hear if they've actually been inspired by that at all, or if they're trying to recapture that. But yeah, Alundra's a big favourite of mine as well, so yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the future.
Yeah. And very few people know too, i.e. Alundra, that Dual Hearts on the PS2 is technically Alundra 3.
What?
Yeah, it's all the same developers, and the whole point of the game is that every dungeon is a different person's dream, which was the original Alundra's premise.
Fuck, why didn't I know this?
So it's basically PS2 Alundra. It's just not called Alundra, but it's Dual Hearts. It's also developed by Matrix Software. It's all the same people, and it's on the PS2.
Well, I know what I'm ordering next.
Yeah, it's a great game, and no one ever knows that connection exists.
Sweet. Well, now you've educated everyone, including me, so thank you for that.
Yep. Let's see, not much else. Taiko no Tatsujin, the drum game, was rated in Australia for the Switch. And sometimes, I don't like to like fly off the handle and indulge in like speculation often, but like in the past, Australian ratings board announcements have been a good indicator that stuff has been coming west with an English version. And it's been quite a while since we've gotten a Taiko no Tatsujin game in the West. So my fingers are crossed. I think the Switch is the perfect platform for them.
Definitely.
Also, fun fact about the Taiko no Tatsujin games, I don't know if you're familiar with like the cute art in them, right? Like the little drum friends and stuff. The artist who does all the adorable Taiko no Tatsujin games is married to Yoko Taro.
Oh, wow. I think I did know that, actually. I remember reading something about that when I was researching the stuff for Nier Automata a while back. But
and like that's why there's all the cute artwork for the characters from Drakengard 3.
Yeah.
Because she did that. All that cute artwork in the Taiko no Tatsujin style. So it's hilarious to me that like Yoko Taro, like the king of sad, is married to like the illustrator who makes a living drawing happy drum friends.
Sounds like a perfectly balanced relationship to me.
It's important.
Yeah.
The balance is important. So I think that's all I got. Except for that little bit about Furyu, the developer Furyu, they're temporarily halting smartphone game development, which is pretty cool to me because you usually hear the opposite, right? Like, we're not making normal games anymore, we're making cell phone games. But apparently Furyu's console and handheld development has been more profitable than their mobile game development, so they're going to continue to focus on console games for a while right now.
That's good to hear, because they've got that new one coming out as well that I've forgotten the name of, haven't they? They're working on something at the minute.
Yeah, that Crystar is a new action RPG from them. Caligula Effect is them.
Oh, right.
And for me, most importantly, Legend of Legacy and Alliance Alive on the 3DS were both them, and I absolutely adore those games. They get derided a lot for being kind of a derivative developer, but I like their output because they kind of take concepts that exist out there and they just put their own spin on them in interesting ways.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of people get on Alliance Alive and Legend of Legacy for being ripoffs of the Saga games, but to that I say, well, Square doesn't really release the Saga games in the West physically for me, so I'm going to keep buying Furyu's attempts to make that style game.
And also, there's not really anyone else sort of ripping off Saga either, is there? So it's not as if it's a really saturated part of the RPG market. So Saga's very much its own unique thing, so people who like it probably want a bit more.
Yep, correct. So that's all I got for news today.
All right, that sounds good to me, because we've talked for a good half an hour on that, so obviously a lot more going on than we might have initially thought, definitely.
Like I said, lots of little stuff, but all cool stuff.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so we're going to take a short break now, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about what we've been playing recently. Welcome back. This is our second segment, and we're going to be talking a little bit about what we've been playing recently. Now, I know you've been very busy lately, Chris, but have you actually found some time to play some games along the way?
Yeah, I have in the past week. I was getting my house painted, so I haven't even really had access to my consoles or my TV for a good week. But after the house painting was done, I've dug deep back into Hyrule Warriors.
Nice.
I don't want to spend too much lip service on it because, we've covered it extensively in a previous episode, but I completed Legend mode, started digging into Adventure mode, which basically is the actual meat of the game, so I'm really enjoying myself there. Just to plug it again, if you have a Switch, go buy Hyrule Warriors, because I can't really think of a better investment of $60. This game is basically infinite. Yes. It's unbelievable.
Yes, and also, if you would like to know more about this, it is this month's cover game on MoeGamer, so please check it out. Yes, so I'll be covering that in detail this month in both video and written format, so if you need further convincing, which hopefully you shouldn't by now, read that. Anyway, so Hyrule Warriors is really good, I will second that. I've been playing it a bit as well. I finished the first adventure map. Well, I say finished. I beat Ganon on the first adventure map, but that left me at about 43% completion of time, which gives you an idea of. And there's like 9 adventure maps, so 43% complete on one of 9 maps should give you an idea of how long this game will keep you going. But yeah, I'm having a great time unlocking characters, learning new stuff about how they play with their different weapons, how different characters work well together in certain scenarios. The adventure mode I really love, just because it doesn't just present you with a repeated sequence of warriors battles. It gives you all sorts of interesting scenarios. It does things like test your observational skills in some levels, because it's got these little quizzes where it asks you sort of trivia questions about Zelda and enemies that you've faced throughout Hyrule Warriors. And then there's things like just defeat 400 enemies in 10 minutes or something like that, which is often a lot more complicated than it sounds, because it has a habit of throwing giant bosses at you while you're doing that as well. So there's often... yeah.
I'm really fond of like the danger all hits or critical hits levels because it basically turns them into shooting galleries. Because then you just equip the bow, and then it's like a dodging and rolling and shooting with the bow level, basically. Because you don't want to get close to anyone, because even grunts can take you down to 1 heart in 1 hit. And then you won't get your A rank because you've like 1 hit means you've already taken too much damage to get your A rank. So it turns the entire game on its head and turns it into a distance and dodging game, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's great, and they really know how tense those can be as well, because they often throw absolutely enormous hordes of enemies at you on those levels as well.
And then you see the like danger archer enemies coming, and you're like, oh shit! Now they can do what I've been doing to cheat the system the whole time, and then, it's great. They're great levels. Yeah.
So I actually haven't really got into the other maps all that much as well, but what most of the other maps do is they layer other mechanics on top of what the first adventure map does. So things like the Master Quest map, which follows the same basic layout as the first adventure map. It sort of layers additional rules on top of things, like it does things like sort of time limits or limitations on what you can do in a battle, like some won't let you use items, some won't let you heal, and that kind of thing. And then the ones that are based on things like Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and so on, they've got their own unique map mechanics that are based on their source material. So on Wind Waker, you've got to deal with things like headwinds on the map and get rid of those before you can progress in certain directions. In Phantom Hourglass, you've got to reset the timer every so often. There's a similar mechanic on the Majora's Mask map as well. So, yeah, a lot to discover, a lot to learn, and a hell of a lot of game there if you need something to keep you going for a good few months.
Every map is essentially a game in and of itself. Like I've probably put 6 to 8 hours into the map 1 at this point, and I'm only maybe 15% complete. Like it's just great. If you're the kind of gamer who likes to buy what I call investment games, the kind of game that you can buy and then not have to buy another game for 6 months, Hyrule Warriors is essential.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree with that totally. So. Yeah, as I say, read more about that on MoeGamer this month, because I'll be writing a lot of words about it that will convince you further should you need it. Anyway, I have just finished off my month of covering the Shantae series, so I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about Half Genie Hero, the most recent game in the series.
Yes, let's.
Yes, you've played that a bit, haven't you? You haven't beaten it or anything, though, have you?
Yeah, but I've played enough of it to understand the structural differences that makes it different from other Shantae games, for sure.
Yeah. So, for those unfamiliar, the Shantae series is sort of... It started as the sort of open interconnected world concept, with sort of unlocking abilities as you go to try and make sure that certain areas are locked off until a certain point, and then you can go back and find additional things and so on. As the series has progressed, it hasn't abandoned that, but it's kind of drifted away from the traditional way that concept is in there. So I think sort of Pirate's Curse is the first one where it kind of had harder divides between areas. So rather than one interconnected world, you had lots of separate areas that were each their own little mini world and so on. And Half Genie Hero takes that a little bit further by having these discrete levels that are split into several stages with a boss at the end of them. So it's sort of structured the most like a traditional platform game, but at the same time you can go back and replay these levels with new abilities and go and discover hidden items and so on. And if you're playing either the base game with Shantae as your playable character or the Risky Boots DLC, then you'll revisit each of those levels a good 3 or 4 times at least to get all the hidden stuff in them. And it's really interesting how different those levels feel once you've come back with these new abilities, because they expand into these whole new areas. You get the ability to go into underwater areas, there's walls you can break through, there's hidden rooms you can't access without certain abilities. So yeah, it might initially appear to be a fairly simple structure of a game where you run from left to right and then fight a boss, but the further you go in the game, the more interesting and complex it becomes.
Yeah, I was surprised when I played Half Genie Hero, having played Half Genie Hero, that the amount that people were like complaining about the structural changes, that it was different, so radically different in terms of not being quote unquote like a Metroidvania, because I hadn't actually played Pirate's Curse prior to Half Genie Hero. I played Half Genie Hero first.
Right.
So having played Pirate's Curse, it's just a clear evolution of that direction they were going in. Like, yeah. So I didn't really understand the backlash. but also as an old school Castlevania fan, it's not really much different from what Konami did with Order of Ecclesia, which is one of the most well-regarded Castlevania games.
Right.
Because Order of Ecclesia did not have one massive interconnected world. It had a map screen, and then each level was a large interconnected level.
Okay.
So it was basically exactly like Pirate's Curse. So like, there's precedent for that kind of game out there. It wasn't like WayForward was doing something completely unheard of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think any backlash that there was, which seems to have mostly died down now from what I've seen, because all I've seen from people recently, I've seen a lot of fan art being posted of Shantae, including some stuff that shouldn't be shared with polite society. But but yeah, I've seen nothing but love for Shantae recently, with the release of the Ultimate Edition of Half Genie Hero and so on. So I think what initial backlash there might have been seems to have died down, and people are accepting the game for what it is now. Personally speaking, I think I prefer Pirate's Curse slightly, but this isn't to sort of diminish Half Genie Hero at all. I absolutely loved Half Genie Hero, and I love all the additional modes and stuff. I just think I slightly preferred the way Pirate's Curse did things, but like you say, it's WayForward experimenting with different things. Some things they'll take as having worked, some things they might decide didn't work, and then by the time we get a new Shantae game, I'm sure we'll have something different to explore again. So
yeah, I'm currently playing Pirate's Curse. Like, that's like, besides Hyrule Warriors, like, that's like the game I'm playing right now, and largely inspired by your coverage of it last month. I was like, I have to actually dig my hands into this game finally. It's wonderful. I mean, it's definitely a slightly better game than Half Genie Hero, and it's definitely a slightly better game than Risky's Revenge. It's pretty much the pinnacle, I think, of the series so far.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it's sort of evoking what was really a sort of golden age for this kind of game as well. It's very much channeling the 32-bit era,
yes,
which was a really good time for this type of game. I know a lot of people sort of still associate it with the beginning of sort of 3D and so on, but there were tons of really good 2D platform exploration games in the 32-bit era, and Pirate's Curse in particular is very much channeling that side of things in so many different ways. It's just really made me happy to play that game.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And like, you know, I approach a lot of games from an artistic perspective too, and like, so it's really interesting to me to look at the way Pirate's Curse is really put together from like a visual and pixel art standpoint, because there's a lot of like cheating going on. Like, if you look at the boat, like, it is a classic pixel art sprite, but they rock it back and forth, so like it clearly exists like within that engine. Like, in a traditional 16-bit game, right, you would have had, if you wanted that ship to rock on the water like it does, you would have had to have redrawn that ship 6 different times in different stages of that rocking. But
it would be that or Mode 7, wouldn't it? It would be an opportunity for developers to go, look, we know how to use Mode 7.
Right. So in Pirate's Curse, they literally just rock the sprite back and forth, and like, it's not something a lot of people would notice, but like, as someone who likes to fiddle with pixel art, I notice it, because I'm like, wait, there's no way that's actually happening, because the pixels would distort at that angle. Like, you can't have a pixel be at a 90-degree angle. But like, you know, Pirate's Curse takes that aesthetic that you want to see, but they figured out a way to still make it visually appealing and functional without bogging themselves down into the minutia of pixel art that makes it take forever. Yeah. So like, they've managed to make a really visually appealing yet still quite modern game, and it's a lot of fun to engage with from that level too, besides just playing it, to try to figure out how they did those things. Like, really, WayForward are freaking wizards. Like, the work they do is amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely masters of their craft. And I think over the last month, I already knew they were good, because I'd already played the first 2 Shantae games, but I'd never played Pirate's Curse and Half Genie Hero before this month. But playing the whole series in succession has just given me so much appreciation for what they're good at, and yeah, hats off to them, really.
Yeah, and if you like the aesthetic of that era of WayForward games, like the Risky's Revenge and Pirate's Curse, I would also recommend checking out the works of Andrew Botto, who is a pixel artist who works independently, that does a lot of contract work for WayForward, and he makes his own games independently. I know you've played Ultionis, A Tale of Petty Revenge.
Oh, right, yep.
That's Andrew Botto, and he also has another game, Mystic Bell, which is which is basically an attempt to make a really adorable adventure game, but tethered to a Metroidvania structure. So it's not really much of an action game. There is some platforming and combat, but it's just more about like finding items to solve puzzles. It's like it's a good like relax when you've had a stressful day game, because it's just cute and quirky and like gorgeous pixel art. Like, he's a really fantastic artist.
He also works quite a bit with Jake Kaufman, doesn't he, the Shantae composer?
Yeah. Those kind of all those guys are kind of buddy, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're doing the same sort of things, it makes sense to team up on projects, doesn't it? So
sure,
definitely. Okay, have you found time for anything else other than what we talked about already?
A couple weeks ago, at least after the last episode, but before this episode, I did get a chance to dig in a little bit to the spin-off game that Koji Igarashi and the Inacreates crew made for Bloodstained. The 8-bit spin-off game?
Yeah,
Curse of the Moon?
Curse of the Moon. Circle of the Moon is Castlevania, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's awesome. I mean, it's Inacreates making an 8-bit pixel art platformer, so of course it's going to be amazing. It's basically like take everything you know and love about the Mega Mans that Inacreates did, like 8 and 9, the 8-bit Mega Mans, the modern 8-bit Mega Man games, and basically what if they did a Castlevania like that? So it harkens back to Castlevania 3 in that after each level you're unlocking a new character with a different ability set that you can then swap in between throughout the levels. Like, you start out with the samurai guy who has like a slash attack and like a chain whip attack, and then the next character you unlock is Miriam, which is like the main character of the real Bloodstained game, and then she actually fights with the whip. So once you get her, it feels a bit more like classic Castlevania. And then you get the wizard guy in level 3, and the wizard guy you get in level 3 feels like controlling Sypha in Castlevania 3. So he has a smaller health bar, but he has different spells with different applications, so you can access different things, or you have to actually use your head to figure out what spells to tackle enemies with instead of just running in. So like, it's a really interesting game, really gorgeous, classic, like, you know, what we would call the modern pixel art aesthetic. So it's kind of trying to operate within the confines and present you something that looks like a Nintendo game, an 8-bit NES game, but it's not specifically limiting itself to like frame rates, the amount of sprites that can be on screen, or the amount of colors that can be used, or what colors can be used. So kind of the way I always describe games like this is it looks a bit like, in your head, when you think of Nintendo games, you think of them looking this way, but they didn't actually look this way because they had too many limitations. But but like, you know, there's beautiful colors, beautiful animation. It's absolutely lovely. If you played Shovel Knight, it's got a similar feel to that in terms of slightly expanded 8-bit, but still 8-bit.
Oh, sounds good. Yeah, I have this downloaded. I got it quite late because they messed up the distribution of European Switch code somehow. But I have downloaded this now, but I haven't got around to trying it. But yeah, I've heard nothing but good things so far. So very much looking forward to giving that a go, particularly after my binge on Indie Creates a few months back. So.
Yeah, so my only complaint about it is that I wish it was included in the physical package for Bloodstained, so that there would be a way to archive it, because this is the kind of game I want to own physically. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, there's a bunch of indie games that I wish would get physical releases. So we're lucky that we got Gunvolt for Switch, definitely, because those are two really good games.
I want Blaster Master Zero so bad.
Blaster Master Zero, Mighty Gunvolt Burst. Those are the main ones I'd like to see a physical copy of. I'm holding out hope for some sort of Indie Creates compilation at some point that maybe, I don't know, maybe has all three of those games in it or something like that, because the thing that's probably holding them back is they cost like sort of £7 or £8 digitally, and they're probably assuming that people don't want to pay £20 or £30 for a physical copy of something that is way cheaper online. So
yeah,
I don't know. You never know. We might get some sort of compilation pack in the future, like what happened with Gunvolt.
I would pay $30 for a copy of Bloodstained or Blaster Master Zero. What they should do is they should follow Nicalis' model and make a nice premium package out of it. Like, if Blaster Master Zero came with a beautiful, quirky NES-style instruction manual and like a mini soundtrack CD, or even a download code for the soundtrack on an MP3 form.
Yeah.
Like, I would consider that a reasonable enough package to justify a $30 price tag.
Yeah, definitely. Same. And I mean, we can sort of bring this back to Shantae a bit as well, because I mean, Half Genie Hero got a physical release in its base game format. Now it's got this Ultimate Edition version, which is slightly more expensive, but comes with all the DLC. And I certainly don't feel hard done by with that version. Although the main game is sort of less than 10 hours long, which people sort of put their noses up at these days. There's with all the additional stuff there as well. Yeah, it's great. I certainly didn't begrudge paying the money for that, particularly because I got the Day 1 edition that has this lovely art book, a soundtrack CD in it as well. So, definitely. Okay, what else have I been playing? I have been playing Sonic Adventure.
Oh, fun.
Yes. Those of you who support me on Patreon will know that I have got August set aside for a Sonic month to coincide with the release of Sonic Mania Plus, which I'll be covering as part of that. And one thing I want to do is I want to get through as many Sonic games as possible, right from sort of the earliest ones up until the more controversial recent ones, and I want to give all of them a fair shake. So I've been starting early on these. So I'm pretty familiar with the Mega Drive ones up until now, Sonic 1 and 2 in particular. Sonic 3 I'm slightly less familiar with, but I'm working my way through that.
Best soundtrack.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, Sonic Adventure is one that I played to death back in the Dreamcast days, but haven't touched since. So it's been quite interesting to revisit it with the new DX content that was originally added in the GameCube version, if I remember rightly.
What platform are you playing it on?
PC.
PC, okay.
Yeah, so it's the PC port, so it runs in sort of full high definition, 60 frames a second for the most part anyway. And it's got the additional content from the DX version. Obviously it doesn't have any of the sort of little DLC add-ons that the Dreamcast version had, but I mean those were mostly just special events in the field and so on. But yeah, I've been really enjoying it. Obviously there are some elements that have aged better than others. It's clearly from an era before real physics engines, for one thing. But aside from that, there's a lot to like about it. It controls pretty well despite the lack of physics engine. The levels are very varied, especially when you revisit the same levels with different characters. They always play very differently with the different characters. And just the fact that you've got all those different characters to play, giving you a bunch of different games in one. I mean, Sonic's story is by far the most substantial of all of them, but each of them have their own unique twist on things. They get you doing different things. They get you learning how to control a character that handles very differently. Yeah, I'm having an absolute blast with it. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the series has evolved from since then. And the one thing I want to do with my Sonic month is sort of get away from this idea of, Sonic has been bad for a long time. I'm sure there have been missteps along the way, but I'm sure there's also redeeming features in even the worst of his games. So this is why I want to explore all of them. I want to play them through as much as possible. And yeah, just revisiting Sonic Adventure has really made me happy.
Yeah, I'm glad. I can't wait for some of your coverage, specifically because you're also going to be looking at the weird Wii ones, right? Like Black Knight and Seven Rings or whatever.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm really excited to hear someone give those a real fair shake, because I've never played them myself, and I've always been curious about them.
Yeah, I haven't really played any modern Sonic games since Sonic Adventure 2, I don't think. I did pick up Sonic Generations on PC in a Steam sale and played a few levels of it, but I
good.
Sort of... Yeah, absolutely. I got a really good impression of that, but I just didn't dive deep into it for some reason. So this is a good opportunity to revisit those games that people commonly understand to be good ones in the series, and also look at the ones that have been less well received as well. The one I'm probably most interested in is the one that people hate the most, which is Sonic 2006.
Oh yeah.
Which I know is supposedly a total mess and a buggy piece of crap and whatnot, but I am so interested to see what it's all about. And also, like you say, the two Wii ones, because they just sound like such a weird concept for Sonic. And also, like I've said to you offline as well, I picked up the BioWare developed RPG for DS as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what the fuck? So yeah, very much looking forward to those. Sonic Adventure has been a lot of fun so far, so I'm coming to the end of that now, so I'll be moving on to Sonic Adventure 2, and from there on I'm pretty much into unexplored territory for me for the series, so it's going to be really interesting to play some of these games for the first time.
You should also check out the weird fighting game for the Game Boy Advance.
Game Boy Advance. Wow.
Yeah.
I knew about Sonic the Fighters because that's on Sonic Gems collection, I think, but I didn't know there was a GBA one as well.
Yeah, I think it's Sonic Battle.
Right.
Sonic Battle. It's on the Game Boy Advance, and it's like Sonic Power Stone, basically.
Wow.
It's like a really low poly 3D plane with 2D sprites, and you like just run around and like wail on each other on the Game Boy Advance. It's a really weird game.
It's such a weird series. I love it.
See, this is why you keep me around.
Right. No, I mean, this is why I want to cover the series, not just to sort of give a bit of love to those games that sort of a few people like out there, but they're commonly described as bad or whatever, but just because it's such a fascinatingly experimental, weird as fuck series that Sega have just obviously thrown everything at the wall at some point and said, right, now we'll do a fighting game, now we'll do an RPG, now we'll do a racing game.
You ever play Sonic Jam?
No. No.
That's like the Mario Party attempt on the Dreamcast, Sonic Jam.
Okay.
They tried to make a Mario Party style game. I love Sonic. Well, we did a whole episode about Sega. I'll talk Sega all day. I love Sonic. I love Sega.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm definitely falling towards your camp at the minute so far. I mean, I've always enjoyed the Sonic games that I've played. So. Like I say, really looking forward to exploring the rest of those, so watch out for those in August. Alright, anything else you want to mention that you've been playing?
No, I think that's it. I think I'm going to be stuck on Hyrule Warriors for a long time. But there's a lot of great stuff coming out next week, Octopath Traveler, so hopefully I'll have some of that to talk about for the next episode.
Yeah, very interested to hear about that. That's a game I'd like to cover at some point, so I'll be picking it up at some point. I don't know if I'll be grabbing it next week, but certainly at some point in the near future there will be a lot of words written about that. So
yeah, I certainly won't have time to play it much because I'm in the middle of too many other games, but I'm just buying it next week out of principle because I basically will support anything that dev team does. Like, I love Bravely Default so much it hurts. So just like anything those guys do, like I'm all over, like white on rice.
Well, I shall look forward to hearing your thoughts on that then. Okay, let's wrap up this segment for now, and then we'll move on to our third segment about graphics after a short break. So we'll see you in a moment.
What is the logical course?
Welcome back. I want to start this segment with a little story from my youth, which was many years ago now. This was back in sort of the early to mid PlayStation days, and it involved my friends Ed and Woody, who were sort of my inseparable friends at secondary school. And we had a little ritual whenever a new game came out that was to do with sort of new games that were particularly impressive and so on. So something like Gran Turismo would be a good example. And our little ritual was that we would boot the game up, we'd play it for a bit, and then we'd call the other person, and then we'd just say, graphics! At them. and all that meant was, just that one word, it just meant, oh my god, this is the most impressive thing I've ever seen. But yeah, so many times we would just receive a phone call of just someone going, graphics! Or see each other at school, and like the first thing we'd see was just go, Pete, graphics. And
now, were you being facetious, or were you like genuinely like
no,
delighted about it?
Genuine. The only stuff that got a graphics from us was stuff that had legitimately impressed us for one reason or other. So and this continued into probably about the Dreamcast era, certainly. So sort of this was after we'd sort of separated and gone to university and so on. We'd still get these phone calls every so often. So yeah, I just wanted to share that because it's vaguely relevant to what we're talking about today, which is graphics. Specifically, the idea of what is impressive in graphics these days and how that might have changed over time, and whether the constant pursuit of photorealism that Western games seem to be going for is the most desirable approach, and so on. So I've got a few things that we want to talk about here. So the first thing I'd like to ask you is, can you recall the first game that really impressed you graphically?
The first game that really impressed me graphically. Oh, that's tough. I can recall very clearly the first game that I really like fell in love with graphically. Like, I don't know if that's the same as impressed. You know what I mean? Like artistically and like aesthetically was Strider 2 on the PS1.
Okay.
That was like the first time I was ever like, wow, like this is beautiful. Because I really loved, like we mentioned earlier in the episode when I was talking about Mega Man Legends. Like, yeah. I have a real soft spot for low poly 3D with pixel art textures, and Strider 2 was just that, like, beautiful fusion of low poly with 2D like low pixel count 2D textures mapped to it, but absolutely gorgeous 2D character sprites. Like, the characters aren't 3D, so it's like that paper cutout on 3D plane look.
Okay,
and like that was kind of I was kind of at an age at that point where I was like actually starting to understand graphics, how they're made, and artistic styles, and the differences between artistic styles. Like, I'm sure as a kid, like when I played Mario 64, I probably like lost my mind, right? But like, the first time I can recall actually thinking critically and being impressed by graphics was Strider 2 on the PS1.
Okay, yeah. I've sort of gone back and forth on this about what my sort of definitive answer might be, and I don't really have one, because there have been several occasions where there have obviously been sort of watershed moments for graphics for me, and the earliest one I can think of is a game that you won't have heard of, because it was like an Atari 8-bit exclusive. I think it might come out on the Commodore 64 and such like as well, but I know those computers are an area of things that you're a bit less familiar with. Sure. But there was a game called Draconis on the Atari 8-bit is where I played it. It was by a developer called Zeppelin Games. They were a British developer who were primarily known for doing budget price games. But their main thing was the fact that although they were making budget price games, and budget price games at that time means like £1.99 a cassette you could buy down the newsagents, this was their first big scale game that cost a little bit more. I think it cost like £20 or something like that, so it was a big deal for them. What they had always done, even with their low budget games, is they were very, very good at mastering the hardware of the platforms they were making their games for. So they always had really, really impressive visuals. Draconis was particularly impressive. It always stands out to me just because it had such good use of colour and shading and such like. That era of early computer games, you think back on it, and a lot of things typically have sort of very large areas of solid colour. There's not much colour on the screen. In a lot of cases, they use display trickery, like in old Taito games, like various versions of Space Invaders, where different parts of the screen can have different colours and such like. But the thing with Draconis is each screen had its own sort of unique colour palette, and then the player sprite was this sort of... it was a kind of anthropomorphic lizard type thing, so he walked on his hind legs, but he could breathe fire and jump and that sort of thing. He was always green, and he had several shades of green in there that sort of gave him a bit of detail and so on. And then the backgrounds for each area that you went through, they were several shades of one particular colour. So one room might be orange, one room might be red, one room might be blue and such like. But there was so much detail in those screens that I just hadn't seen in a game on that limited hardware at that time. This was sort of the early crossover period between 8-bit computers and the beginning of 16-bit computers like the ST and Amiga. So this was by far the most impressive thing that I'd seen on the 8-bit at the time. And that just really left an impression on me. When I think back to the best of what the Atari 8-bit had to offer, that's the one that I think of. Moving on to sort of the ST side of things, there were some oddly specific things that I found impressive, and I don't know how much you'll relate to this side of things, but I used to be very impressed by what I thought of as a stripy sky.
Okay.
And what I mean by a stripy sky is a sky that wasn't just one solid colour.
Oh, sure.
So it was something that had sort of a horizon hazing on it. Is the most common thing. So it was most commonly seen in things like flight simulators and so on, where it would sort of blur the line. Because in early flight simulators there would be a hard divide between where the ground was and where the sky was, and that was the horizon line. As graphics got a bit more advanced and developers got a bit better at using more colours on the screen, they developed a way of kind of blending the colours a bit more around that horizon line to make it look a bit more convincing and a bit smoother. And then there are other games that use similar techniques in the background to provide a bit more colour and a bit more interest in there. So a good example in that regard that wasn't a flight simulator was a game by a company called the Bitmap Brothers called Gods. Have you ever heard of that before?
Yep, I actually played the Genesis / Mega Drive version of Gods a lot as a kid.
Okay, yeah. Gods was an interesting one from my perspective because it was one of the few games we had that was enhanced for the Atari STE, which was a later model of the Atari ST 16-bit computer that had much better graphical capabilities. It could display more colours on screen at the same time. It could run things a bit faster. I think its processor was slightly faster. It had more graphics memory and such like. And the main way that manifested itself in Gods was in sequences where you could see the outside rather than having just a solid background. It had this beautiful hazy sky effect that was sort of blending from blue to white to sort of shades of pink and so on, and it was almost like a sunset effect, and that was really stunning to me at the time.
Yeah, that's hue shifting, which is that's a tremendous in pixel art, like modern pixel art today, like hue shifting is like, oh, that guy knows what's up, he can hue shift. It's interesting to me because like the aesthetic I find so pleasing in pixel art is really mostly inspired by kind of flat Japanese cell shading, but a lot of like the people in the pixel art scene right now that we consider like masters of the craft are the guys who really like made big strides with hue shifting, and that's interesting to me because I associate hue shifting specifically with that Euro PC aesthetic. Yeah, and I don't love it, so like it's tough for me when I'm on like pixel art forums like trying to get critiques and everyone's like, you gotta learn how to hue shift, brah, and it's like, actually I do know how to hue shift. It's specifically a look I avoid, brah. Yeah. but yeah, it when done right, especially into conflicting colors, like if you can transition like a blue into a pink for like a sunset, like it's breathtaking. Yeah. And like if you pair that with good parallax scrolling.
Yes.
Then like the stripy sky's like ultimate, like clouds moving in different speeds while you walk like one side to the other. Yeah, like that stuff's goosebump level stuff.
Yeah, so I mean a good example of that you're describing is the original Amiga version of Shadow of the Beast, I think is a good one for that. Mm-hmm. Just because that's got such beautiful parallax scrolling that they absolutely crucified on the ST version. But the Amiga version of that is still breathtaking to me.
Well, I mean, that whole opening sequence of that game is basically just a showcase for that parallax scrolling, because the first area is a huge open plain just with sparse trees that just disappears into the background. Like, I can remember playing even the Genesis version of that, and obviously it wouldn't be anywhere near as powerful as the Amiga version, but like, I remember being impressed as a kid by the expansiveness of that scene thanks to that parallax.
Yeah, definitely. So those were sort of early examples of what impressed me. From there on, obviously the sort of hue shifted sky things is quite a specific example, but another thing that I found I really liked in the 16-bit era was when games drew some influence from other media, particularly things like comic books and so on.
Oh, so yes.
One thing that I absolutely loved to see in 16-bit games was either visual on-screen onomatopoeia was one thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing was for things like sword swipes and so on, when you would actually see the slash on the screen.
Okay, sure.
This is something that we absolutely take for granted these days, because any game that involves sort of weapon combat and so on always has weapon trails and such like. But in the sort of 8 and 16-bit eras, certainly the games I was playing, that would typically be handled entirely through just the animation. But there were certain exceptions to that rule. One example is actually the first version of Strider, relating to what you had before. So sort of slashing your sword in Strider had this very large sword swipe effect on screen that I always absolutely loved.
And that's what did the damage, right? Like the sword swipe effect was your weapon, essentially, in Strider.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that was the bit that needed to collide with the enemies to do things. Another good example was a game by, I think it was by Gremlin Graphics. It was called Switchblade 2. It was kind of a Strider rip-off in some ways, in that you had a sort of Japanese-inspired hero who had a sword and he slashed things, and the sword slash effect was what did the damage and so on. But yeah, that was a similar kind of thing. I also really loved arcade games that had this kind of thing. So I really like things like Konami's Turtles games. That had a lot of this side of things. Yeah,
their Avengers game, Captain America and the Avengers.
Yeah, absolutely. I vaguely remember there was a Batman game of some description on the ST as well that was very much comic book inspired. So much so that wandering off each screen, you were wandering into a different comic book panel that certainly sometimes had bits of narration in the corners and such. Like that was really cool.
Did you guys have Comic Zone on the Mega Drive in your region?
Yes, but I didn't play that until much later. I didn't play that until sort of the age of probably Xbox 360 when I got it on the Mega Drive compilation on there. But
that's a hell of a beautiful game.
We definitely had that, yeah. And that was one of those games that I admired from afar, certainly, because I didn't have my own Mega Drive at the time. The Mega Drive was something I only got to play on when I went round to my friend's house or when my brother brought one home. So that was one that I would sort of admire in magazines and think, yes, that's the sort of thing I really like. At the same time as all that, though, we were starting to see the beginning of the pursuit of photorealism. My dad has always been into flight simulators, specifically civil aviation flight simulators, so he's always been big on Microsoft Flight Simulator and Sublogic Flight Simulator before that. I remember the first time he picked up Flight Simulator version 5, I think it was. This was the first one that didn't use flat shaded polygon graphics. It was the first one that used texture map graphics. They were all completely flat, so there wasn't any sort of elevation or anything like that, except in certain areas where you'd maybe have a mountain sticking out the ground and so on. But that involved satellite photography of various US cities and so on.
Okay.
And that was very impressive to look at. I did play around with Flight Simulator a bit, but it's not something I would sort of sit and fiddle around with for hours like my dad did. But I found that side of graphics an interesting development. I wasn't sure if I liked it, but it was certainly something that I found impressive at the time. So, I mean, what do you think of the pursuit of photorealism generally? I mean, do you have any sort of fond memories of it from the early days, and how do you feel about it now?
Not really, which probably shouldn't come too much of a surprise given what we already know about the types of aesthetics I appreciate. But like the whole time you were telling that story about graphics, like it was funny to me because the reason I asked you if you were facetious is like my friends and I used to essentially do the same thing, but at a later age. So like when I was in, say, from about 16 to about 22, I worked at a independently owned game shop down the street. So me and a bunch of guys, some of us are still friends to this day, we would do the same thing, but like specifically for games that we felt were totally hollow, but only were interested in graphics.
Yeah.
So we would play a game that obviously had spent its entire budget pursuing photorealism, and the game itself was utter rubbish. And that's what we would like. We would just look at each other and go, graphics, like like that's because that to me is like, I don't know. I find the photorealism and the pursuit of photorealism troubling because so much can go wrong, and if you fail, you just end up with something that looks absolutely terrible. Like it's like I'm always more of a fan of stylized approaches, and I always have been my entire life. Even like when I think about even 8-bit Nintendo, right? Like think about what are the most attractive 8-bit Nintendo games. It's not the stuff like when they made a freaking licensed game based on Predator, right? Like 8-bit Arnold Schwarzenegger, like dithered in 3 colors. Like it looks like garbage. Like so to me, it was always games look better when they are stylized.
Yeah.
And like I'm not saying abandon realism and photorealism in every single way, shape, or form. For instance, I really like Horizon. On the PS4, right? Horizon is graphically a super impressive game, right? That engine that the guys at Guerrilla put together is unbelievable. But, like, I don't really consider Horizon a photorealistic game.
Right.
Like, there's subtle, stylized elements to it where they've taken in a point to say, we're not trying to make the real world, and these people still have a bit of an animated look to them. And, like, I find that that's an important line to walk.
Yeah, definitely.
What I don't like is, like, when we start hitting Uncanny Valley. It's like, I know you're a fan of David Cage games. I don't like David Cage games. I don't like the people in David Cage games. They look like silly putty Muppets that are going to try to eat my soul. I do not like it. But because he's trying so hard to make them real that it's Uncanny Valley, right? The more real you try to make it, the more real you try to make something fake appear, the more fake it appears.
Did you play L.A. Noire?
I did not.
L.A. Noire was an interesting one because it sort of had the Rockstar look about it, if you know what I mean by that, which is...
Yeah.
Rockstar does have a sort of faintly stylized style about it, and there are elements of realism about it. But what L.A. Noire did that was quite interesting and didn't quite work, I don't think, is what they did with the facial animation.
Yeah, there was a lot of mapping and stuff for that, right? Like actual capture mapping.
Yeah, so I mean, rather than sort of the traditional approach to facial animation, which is sort of rigging various points around I mean, I don't know the technicalities of it, but you sort of rig various parts of the face and you can make the mouth make certain shapes and so on. I think they did something with actual video capture with L.A. Noire, I think, which gave the facial animation a very fluid look to it. But it also kind of took you out of it almost as well, just because you had this very realistic face on what was still obviously a polygonal character.
No, that sounds like it would put me off immediately.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't quite the same sense of Uncanny Valley as you're describing with David Cage model, so it's certainly a similar kind of thing. And it was an interesting experiment, I think, but I also think that it's quite telling that we haven't seen it used again since then. Not only for the fact that it was apparently ludicrously expensive and complicated to do, but I just think that it didn't quite work as well as they hoped it would as well. What you bring up with things like the photorealism versus stylistic thing is, yeah, that's kind of where my thinking has been. And my attitudes towards graphics have evolved quite a bit over time as my tastes in games have evolved. So, like, the story I told about going graphics with my friends, that was to do with a period in time when we thought that the pursuit of photorealism was where games were going to go. We thought that was like the holy grail for games graphics, was something that you look at on something that you have on your television screen. Someone walks in the room and thinks you're watching television. And the first game that we thought that came close to happening with was Gran Turismo.
Yeah.
Obviously, that had very, very good graphics for the PS1 era. It still had things like jagged edges and such like, and bendy textures and all the usual flaws that PS1 games had. But I recall Gran Turismo often being described by games magazines at the time by, if you bang your head and squint a bit, it almost looks like you're watching TV. And so that was sort of the holy grail for a while. I forget exactly when I kind of drifted away from that and from that as a desirable thing, but it's certainly been very pronounced in my mind over the last few years in particular. As I've drifted away from AAA games, I start to feel like a lot of those are looking very similar to one another, and I think part of that is to do with the pursuit of photorealism.
Yeah, because, well, if everything has no style, it looks like reality. Reality has no style.
That's what I mean. And I mean, obviously going for photorealism is a style in and of itself, but realism isn't really the reason that I play games. And I know different people play games for different reasons and such like, but for me, I don't really want the things that I'm playing to look like reality, because I mean, I can just look outside and I can see grass waving in the wind and clouds and that sort of thing, and that is something that I've been very conscious of my attitudes towards changing over the years, and it may be partly an effect of getting older or whatever, but yeah, I'm certainly a lot more into heavily stylized graphics now, and particularly stuff that is kept in such a way that it ages very well.
Yeah, well, that's, thinking about Gran Turismo. Well, you were talking about Gran Turismo, and the whole time I'm thinking Gran Turismo, the original Gran Turismo, did not age well. What did age well visually was Ridge Racer 4.
Yes.
Ridge Racer 4 is a little bit realistic, but it has just a slight cartoon sheen to it.
Yeah.
And for that reason, screenshots of Ridge Racer 4 today have a much more pleasant look to them than screenshots of the original Gran Turismo.
Yes, I would agree with that. And it's quite interesting because Ridge Racer 4 used a lot of the same graphical techniques as Gran Turismo. It used things like sort of like the fake reflections and such like, and all that kind of thing, and used heavy use of dithering to make it look like there were more colours on screen than there actually were and such like. But yeah, as you say, just that little bit of adding a bit of unique style to it just gave it the edge over it. What I'm talking about when I say sort of heavily stylized stuff that ages really well. Just before we recorded today, I booted up the Wii version of Rhythm Paradise, or Rhythm Heaven as it was known over there, and that has such incredibly simple graphics.
Yeah, but they're beautiful.
Yeah, but it looks amazing. And this sort of brings me on to my big question here, which is, when you were younger, what were you assuming or hoping that graphics would be like in the future?
Well,
those are probably two different questions, really. But so let's say, what were you hoping graphics would look like in the future?
Shantae Half Genie Hero.
Right.
I wanted playable cartoons.
Yeah.
I can remember very specifically the watershed moment for me, which was Odin Sphere. Like when, I don't really love Vanillaware games because I think they kind of play too floaty. But like just visually, I remember playing Odin Sphere and thinking, we're here. Like we have arrived. Like that was the first game where I thought technology is now capable of delivering the type of games that look the way I've always wanted a game to look.
Yes.
Like, and now we have that. Now we have Half Genie Hero. I'm trying to think what else I played recently. Like, any of the Rhythm Tengoku games really are just beautiful 2D, bright, colorful, crisp, clean visuals.
Yep, you've got stuff like the UbiArt games as well. So you've got some Westerners doing it there. So things like the Rayman Legends and such like as well. Mm-hmm. I pretty much come down on the same side as you now. Like I say, my attitudes have gone back and forth a bit over the years. So sort of I've had periods of hoping that we would have games that look like reality at some point, but on the grand scheme of things, the thing that I've always dreamed of is sort of true interactive cartoons. So I remember back in the Atari ST days, I had a copy of Dragon's Lair: Escape from Singe's Castle, which is one of the Don Bluth games.
I love Don Bluth.
Yeah. So Singe's Castle was basically... it was kind of weird because the home ports of Dragon's Lair, which was a Laserdisc game in the arcades, the home ports of Dragon's Lair didn't have all of the original arcade games content because they already came on like 10 floppy disks, and so there just wasn't a sort of cost-effective way for them to put the whole game in one package. So Escape from Singe's Castle was basically all the stuff they cut out of the first home port of Dragon's Lair. So if you played both of them, you basically had the entirety of Dragon's Lair 1 from the arcades. And it was a really impressive achievement at the time to get sort of this quality animation on a 16-bit home computer, streaming it off floppy disks of all things that held 720k of information. But at the same time, the limitations were very apparent to everyone, even at the time. Dragon's Lair was very much a game where you wait until the right moment, then you push right, and then something cool happens. And what I thought at the time was, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a game that looked like this, where you could control your character, where you could actually control your character and run around, and like, if I don't want to run out of the right door on that first scene, what if I want to see what's through that door in the background? And that just wasn't possible at the time, but it is now, just because of the sort of capabilities of the hardware we've got now, the fact that graphic artists for games are much more capable of producing artwork that can be interactive, that can be three-dimensional, or at least provide the illusion of three-dimensionalness in some circumstances. And yeah, that for me is the most consistent hope that I've had for graphics, was the ability to play an interactive animated movie. And as you say, and as I said in my write-up of Half Genie Hero, Shantae Half Genie Hero is a perfect example of that happening, because you've got this beautiful. I don't know if it actually was hand-drawn animation, but it's certainly got that style about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just looks amazing. It looks like a cartoon on your screen, and it's fantastic. And then if we go back to Rhythm Paradise, Rhythm Heaven as well, what you've got there is something a bit different in that you're not directly controlling characters, but you are doing things that feels a bit more interactive, like you've got a bit more control over them than in something like Dragon Slayer. You're still pressing buttons at the right time to make cool things happen, but you feel like there's a more direct connection between you pressing that button and something happening on the screen.
No, I mean, those games were difficult to enjoy. Just to be generous, right? Like, there was only one button prompt, right? There was only one correct solution. So they were nothing but like really games of memorization.
Yeah.
They weren't really what we would consider a game these days. Like, of course, there's a fail state, but like, you were just locked into the confines of what the animation had done.
Yeah.
It's not like you were controlling a sprite or a character model. You were literally just waiting for a video to play, and then a programming prompt was expecting a button press to tell it what scene to go to next. Like, it was really no different than navigating a menu in a DVD.
Yeah, exactly. It was exactly the same kind of thing.
I don't know if you ever played, of that same era, it was a game called Brain Dead 13.
Yes, I remember that.
And I had that as a kid. I didn't ever have any of the Dragon's Lair games, but I had Brain Dead 13, and I kind of remember thinking the same thing. Like, this is what I want games to look like, but not what I want them to play like.
Yeah. Now, there were some interesting moves towards that, sort of a little bit ahead of the modern era that we're talking about now, and I think, I don't know, how familiar are you with the King's Quest games on PC?
Just like from a historical perspective and like the fact that they exist, but I've never really played any of them.
Right. Around the time of King's Quest VII, which was the second to last one in the series, and sort of probably the second one to really take advantage of the CD-ROM medium that had sort of exploded over the last couple of years. The whole aim of King's Quest VII, and there were a couple of other games from Sierra around the same time that were trying to do the same thing. I think it was a Space Quest and a Leisure Suit Larry around the same time. The whole aim of that was to create an interactive animated movie. And so King's Quest VII brought on board some people who had worked with Don Bluth, who had worked with Disney in the past, and they deliberately stylized their characters so that they looked like animation cells, so they sort of had the hard outlines and lots of flat colouring and that sort of thing. And that, I think, was the first game that I played that was coming close to what I was hoping for. It still wasn't perfect because the resolution was a bit limited, and that meant that there was sort of pixelation on things, and it didn't quite look perfect. It wasn't quite there, but it was a valiant attempt to create that kind of effect. And this was sort of late 90s, I reckon.
Okay.
So it was quite an impressive attempt for that time, but it's taken up until very recently for it to really come to fruition, I think.
I have some pretty good memories, specifically of adventure games, trying to do that. I used to have a copy of Blazing Dragons on the Saturn, and that had some really nice animation. I can't remember if it was hand-drawn or sprite-based, but I remember the actual character models being large, having lots of frames of animation, and I remember thinking, like, we're approaching cartoon territory, but, like, once again, as someone who wasn't a huge fan of adventure games, I remember thinking, I like the way this looks, but I really want a side-scroller like this. I really want a fighting game like this.
Yeah. Adventure games for a while, they thinking about it, they did kind of push the boundaries a bit, because looking back on LucasArts stuff from around the same time as well, we had things like Full Throttle and Sam and Max and Day of the Tentacle and such like, and they all used a very kind of TV animation style at them. Again, the resolution was very limited, so they still obviously looked like games to a certain extent because of the jagged edges and pixels and such like. But there was an obvious attempt there to use some more traditional animation techniques to provide something with some depth to it.
Yeah, well, because the speed of the action wasn't crazy like it would be in a side-scroller, right? The constraints for frame rate and stuff were not as heavy, which would allow them to make those characters have more frames of animation. Like, it was basically just the style of the game is what allowed for that greater depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's quite interesting to look back at early attempts to do more action-type games using more complex animation, using more traditional animation techniques. So you probably know what I'm going to say here, but thinking back to Prince of Persia.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Rotoscoping.
So Prince of Persia was an interesting one. It's not something that I ever really enjoyed playing, just because I found that the animations actually got in the way of the gameplay so much.
Precisely.
Yeah. And this also happened with games that took a similar approach but handled it slightly differently. So something like Another World, or Out of This World as it was known in certain areas.
Flashback.
They had the same issues, even though Another World in particular, that used polygonal characters, but it still used sort of rotoscoped animation in a lot of places, and those animations still got in the way of what you were trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what we talked about earlier. It's just sometimes graphical ambition gets in the way of gameplay, and I was always unwilling to make that compromise.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of a tough pill to swallow at the time, because on the one hand, I wanted to acknowledge that Prince of Persia looked amazing and these animations were great, and the fact that he sort of dangled from platforms and sort of had realistic physics on him was really impressive. But when I fell down a pit on the second level for like the 15th time in a row just because he didn't jump when I told him to, that was less appealing. So I think Odin 3 is a good example, thinking back on it, because that was an example of we were getting some games by that point that had more complex animations, had more frames of animation, had more traditional techniques being used, but they acknowledged that you couldn't prioritize the aesthetic side of things over how it played. Mm-hmm. You needed to make sure those button presses were responsive, because otherwise it just wasn't going to be a good experience for anyone. And I think this is very apparent in Half Genie Hero, because you press something in that and it happens straight away like that. You jump and you jump straight away. You press left and you go left straight away. There's no sort of epic turning animation as she sort of moves around and her hair swishes dynamically in the wind and such like. She just goes left.
I don't know how WayForward made Half Genie Hero. I should really dig into what techniques they use, because like one of the things I really love that's quite common these days is kind of the technique that's pioneered by Arc System Works for their fighting games. Mm-hmm. Where like the way Arc System Works makes these beautiful fighting games, like the Dragon Ball Fighters and like the Blaze Blue games and the recent Guilty Gears, is those characters you actually are seeing on screen are polygonal. Yeah. Like they build polygonal character models so that they can be programmed to react precisely as a programmed thing instead of an image. And then they proceed to draw the 2D image and map it to the polygon model. Yeah. So those games are technically actually 3D, but they are just employing all kinds of tricks and wizardry to overlay an animated 2D image that's mapped to that polygon model, and the result is something that controls responsively, but does not have any of the hang-ups of 2D techniques. So I'd be really curious to see if WayForward employed something similar in Half Genie here. I don't really know how they did it.
Yeah, I have a feeling it may be something similar, because if you look closely at some of the idle animations in particular, you can sort of see things like the characters' heads turning very slightly, and you can see like their face textures moving slightly around their heads and so on. And that looks to me as if it's a 3D model that just looks very much like it is a hand-drawn piece of animation, which is impressive in itself.
Sure.
But yeah, this idea of sort of combining 2D and 3D is something that's really grown in the past few years. And actually, one of the techniques that I find most impressive, it's not sort of a really sort of gobsmackingly spectacular thing or anything, but the use of live 2D and related techniques is something that has really impressed me ever since I saw it for the first time. Okay. I think it was in the first Neptunia game that I saw it for the first time, which is live 2D, if you're not familiar, is an idea where you have a flat piece of 2D art, like a traditional visual novel character sprite or something like that, and then you kind of apply a 3D model. I don't know if it's behind it or if you wrap the texture around it or something like that. I don't know the intricacy of it, but it basically means that you can treat that flat piece of 2D art as if it is a 3D model. So it means you can do things like you can have characters turn their heads slightly, or you can have them sort of change the pose of their shoulders. You can't do anything dramatic like have them move their arms around or anything like that, because
you can have their chests heave when they
you
breathe.
You can have their chests heave, and you can freak out Kotaku with that, which is fun. Yeah, so that really impressed me for the first time, and I think I saw that being taken to the next level in the visual novel series Nekopara. Which doesn't use Live 2D as such. It uses, I can't remember the name of the engine that they use it, but it's a similar kind of idea. But the fluidity of the animation in that is just amazing. It gave so much life to those characters. It's honestly quite difficult to go back to a visual novel with static character sprites after you've experienced that. And so that is one of the most exciting developments that I've seen. Again, it's something that you only really see in a non-interactive context in this case. But that is a side of things that I'm really glad to have seen starting to improve over time. So if you sort of combine those the things we talked about together into one game, so if you have a game that's got sort of these dynamic character animations in dialogue scenes, and then something that looks like Half Genie Hero during actual gameplay, you basically have that new Neptunia game that's coming out soon.
Yeah, I find Live 2D to be a real double-edged sword. Kind of like when you were talking about with photorealism. Like, maybe it's just coming from me understanding a little bit of the art aspect and kind of understanding and knowing what Live 2D is and how it works. But like, I can immediately tell when something's Live 2D. And the problem with that being much like with the photorealism, if it's not done right, it looks really cheap and really crappy. Like, to the point where I would rather it not be there. Like, poorly implemented Live 2D is a lot more offensive to me than just a static image. Yeah. Like, because it looks really bad when it's not done right. Well, it looks really good when it's done right, but it's very easy to do it cheaply and approach the Live 2D almost non-committally and just think it's an inexpensive way to add some zhuzh to your static imagery. And like, if you're not committed to doing it right and making it look good, what you end up with is a product that it looks really cheap. Yeah. No, I can see what you're saying there, definitely. This is why I particularly want to highlight Nekopara as a good example of this being done really well, because it's got very, very natural character animations that have... I don't know if they've been specifically captured as such, but they certainly look like very convincing movements of things like the head and the shoulders and such like. Again, there's no sort of full rigging on the whole body or anything like that, but for me that added a lot to the experience of reading those visual novels. Okay, so I think to sort of kind of wrap up our discussion here then, what are some current favourites do you think are doing it right in terms of what you were hoping games to look like? We've already mentioned Half Genie Hero, obviously. Are there any others that you can think of? Going away from the cartoony thing a little bit, just to pay some lip service to something that's 3D that I think is beautiful. The upcoming Dragon Quest 11 is unbelievable. For pretty much any modern Dragon Quest, the Dragon Quest Heroes titles were also all beautiful. Akira Toriyama's simple, brightly colored art style with like simple shapes and like lower super details really translates so beautifully to 3D. Like this stylized, brightly colored, like fairy tale vision of 3D. It's like these modern Dragon Quest games are like everything I always wanted a 3D game to look like. Right. So like there's that, like I mentioned, all the current Arc System Works games. I actually really like the graphical style that NetherRealm uses in their fighting games right now, because I think it's an example of the reverse effect of what we have talked about. So like I remember playing Mortal Kombat, and like of course Mortal Kombat was an attempt to be photorealistic, right? Because instead of sprites, it was actual pictures of people. Yeah. And it looked like muddy garbage. And I remember not being impressed with Mortal Kombat as a kid. Yeah, absolutely. Because of Uncanny Valley. I didn't think it looked cool. I thought it looked trashy. I still played Mortal Kombat because it was fun, but it was never because I was impressed by the quote-unquote photorealistic graphics. But like now, the NetherRealm fighting games they have nailed a very specific 3D comic booky stylized approach. So like I really like their graphical style now. Like that's an example of them realizing that something wasn't perhaps correct, and now they're doing something that's stylized, looks good, and fits for their games. So like kudos to them for that. Modern pixel art stuff, but that's not really an example of what we're talking about right now. But yeah, I would point people to the new Dragon Quest as really getting it right in terms of striking a fusion between impressive technology but a stylized approach, so that you're not taken out of the experience.
Yeah, definitely. From my perspective, I think I probably want to highlight Gust's games in this regard.
Oh yeah, they're beautiful.
Yeah, because although they're not the most technically impressive games in the world, particularly when you look at things like the background art and so on, they put a lot of love and effort into their character models in particular, so that their character models are always very, very true to the original 2D art for them. And this is especially true in Knights of Azure, for one. Blue Reflection is another great one. Blue Reflection's got beautiful character designs. And
strikingly beautiful.
The 3D models in that really capture the 2D art really nicely. And Blue Reflection has its own technical problems in that its frame rate is complete ass, which puts some people off. But the amount of detail in that game, that is one of the few exceptions in Gust's portfolio where they've actually gone the extra mile in background detail as well. So the actual texture work in the school settings in that is just astonishing. So that looks really great, and that's the sort of thing that I find really pleasing these days. And also, I think again, although it has technical flaws here and there, I think the Senran Kagura series has got a lot of things I like about it, about the character models in particular. There's some very good animation going on, especially in sort of the post-match victory scenes and so on, and in games like Bon Appetit, where they're doing things other than fighting, so they're cooking and doing other stuff like that as well. I think they've got a good grasp of who those characters are, how they move, how they look doing different things besides just the things that they're most well known for. And yeah, that's certainly one that I like coming back to for the way it looks, certainly.
One thing I find interesting is like Senran Kagura's visual style is very like it skirts the line of what we would used to traditionally consider quote unquote cell shading, yeah. but it's not anymore, because like what we used to consider cell shading in like the PS2 and PS3 era is just like technology has made that passé. Like a game either kind of looks cartoony or it doesn't now. Like that specific style is not necessary anymore. I almost wish they would though. Like an example would be probably one of the most beautiful games in the history of Earth is the Transformers game that Platinum made.
Oh yeah.
For modern generation, because that is a modern cell shaded game trying to ape the look of the classic. More specifically, I think it looks more like the Japanese Transformers, or the more recent Japanese Transformers stuff, and like art for the figures, and it actually looks like the old cartoon. I think people who say that game looks like the old cartoon haven't watched the old cartoon in a very long time. Like the shininess and stuff is very reminiscent of the type of shading that Masami Obari uses in his mecha animes. Like it's very modern, but it's cell shaded, and you don't see a lot of cell shaded games nowadays. I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I remember sort of seeing my first cel-shaded games and thinking, wow, this is really impressive. This is a significant step forward towards the sort of things that I'm after. In terms of Senran Kagura, I think a part of what you're describing is to do with the original art style, which is Nan Yagashi's art for those characters is very, very flat-shaded anyway. And I think a lot of the sort of character textures that they use on the models really captures that, which gives them that very sort of... I hesitate to use the word flat when talking about the Senran Kagura character, but yeah, it gives them that sort of flat colour feeling about them, which is, as you say, kind of reminiscent of the old cell shading look, but
I guess Ni no Kuni. I guess the character models in the new Ni no Kuni are technically so. Like level 5 really seems to be the only people who are still like championing cell shading in a traditional sense.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'd like to see more of. The Persona 5 kind of touches on it a bit as well, but again, that has sort of slightly more realistic backdrops, although although Persona 5, its sort of PS3 origins are very apparent in the backdrops, in that the backdrops aren't terribly complicated, which kind of works in its favour in some ways. It gives it a slightly more stylised look than obviously trying to go for photorealistic Tokyo, especially when you layer these anime style characters on top of it. So yeah, that's another interesting example. So Persona 5's a lovely looking game anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, that Persona 5 is an example of how you can use appropriate stylization and a cohesive visual direction to perhaps even disguise what could be technical shortcomings.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't played it myself, but I've watched enough footage of it and seen enough screenshots to understand that it may not be the most technically impressive game, but style trumps technology every time when it comes to a cohesive artistic direction.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Anything else you'd like to say on this topic before we wrap up for today?
I think that's it. Give me more cell-shaded games, please. And more stuff that looks like Shantae Half Genie Hero.
Seconded.
Can't wait for that new Vanillaware mecha game. I don't even remember what that's called. Aegis Rim, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that, actually.
Yeah, everyone forgot about it. I think Vanillaware forgot about it. But that's an example of something I'm looking forward to that kind of will certainly encapsulate everything I've wished games could look like. That new game from that Nintendo showed, Demon Ex Machina.
Yes.
That's a really great example, right? Like, you can tell it's kind of low poly, but because they've like jacked up cell shading techniques on it, it just looks stylish. So like, it's a great example of kind of modern technology being aided by stylistic art direction to deliver something unique. Yeah,
really interested to see how that's going to end up, because there's a lot of big talent attached to that.
Yeah, big robot talent. I think, the big message I would have for developers and stuff is to always consider what technology makes available to you and understand that that's not always photorealism. Like, a lot of the techniques we described here today, specifically like with what Arc System Works does in mapping imagery to 3D polygonal models, was not remotely accessible to do years ago. It's like the level of technology we have now doesn't just allow us to achieve greater photorealism, more bloom lighting, more blades of grass. It also allows us to experiment with new tricks and techniques to innovate and present interesting new stylized attempts at visual presentation as well. Like, we have opportunities to present interesting styles that we never had before.
Yeah.
And the same processing powers that make photorealism possible are also what make those unique presentations possible.
Yeah. Absolutely agreed on all of that. So, all right, I think that's been an interesting discussion there. So we will hold it there for now, because I know you could probably go on about this for several hours more, but I won't subject everyone to that.
I can go on for a lot of things about way too long, if there's anything anyone's learning about me at this point.
I jest. I could talk about this for hours as well. You wait till you get me started on music again. Anyway, so let's wrap this up. I've said this for the third time now. This has been Pete Davison of MoeGamer.net. You can find my writing and articles and all sorts of other good stuff there. At the time of recording, the cover game for the month is Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. So we talked a bit about that earlier on. So if you want to find out a bit more about that, check out the site to find out a bit more about the history of it. And we'll be moving on to discussions of its gameplay and its story and all manner of other good stuff in depth from there. That's MoeGamer.net. Of course, there's other videos coming on this channel as well. Currently doing a Let's Play run through of Sorcery Saga Curse of the Great Curry Gods, which I forgot to plug earlier in our What We've Been Playing segment, so I'll plug it now. That's a fun little mystery dungeon that is worth a look. Recently released on Steam, if you've not come across that. And Chris, where can people find you on the internet?
MrGilderPixels.com or at Instagram as MrGilderPixels. Just starting to get drawing and painting again after my home renovation stuff, so I'll be posting some new stuff throughout the week, hopefully. So make sure to check me out, give me a follow.
Good stuff. All right, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. Be sure to check out MoeGamer.net for new articles on Japanese and Japanese-inspired video games, new and old, every weekday. Every month, MoeGamer features an in-depth exploration of an individual game or series as its cover game, so be sure to check the archives to see if your favourite has had a deep dive yet. If you'd like to support the site directly, please consider becoming a patron or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.